Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military of a Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 29th of May of 2025. Today we have lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to talk about the Sumy direction, where the Russians during the previous 24 hours managed to improve their position significantly. According to information we have, the Russians continue their offensive operation, and currently there are very heavy clashes along the entire line of combat contact, starting from the village of Kondrovka and ending in the vicinity of the village by the name of Miropolskaya. So several sources reported that huge losses were discovered by the Russians in the vicinity of the settlement of Kondratovka. The Russians continue their offensive operation. Furthermore, according to pro-Russian resources, the Russians managed to get the village of Alexeyevka from the north. Currently, the clashes are taking place for the northern outskirts of this village. Furthermore, according to several sources, the Russians managed to secure the village of Vodolahi. And today we got another very interesting, let's say, map update that was published by the pro-Ukrainian sources Deep State. They adjusted their map as well, as you can see, and the most important that they have expanded the gray zone significantly. And according to their understanding and their vision of the situation, currently the Russians managed to get the village of Novonikolaevka from the north, and also pro-Ukrainian sources confirm that the Russians managed to get the village of Alexeyevka. So if we summarize everything that we got during the previous 24 hours, currently the Russians are working and operating inside of this red line. So as you can see, according to all this, we see that the clashes are taking place at least for 3 villages at the same time. The village of Kondrovka, Kindrativka, the village of Alexeyevka, and the village of Novomihailovka. Furthermore, according to information we have, the Russians continue their offensive operation, and currently there are very heavy clashes already on the territory of the northern part of the village of Yunakivka. The Russians improved their positions during the previous 24 hours and took several constructions and buildings under complete control. As of the end of the 29th of May, we don't know for sure what kind of buildings, which buildings the Russians managed to secure and to take, but the sources reported that the progress is very huge. Furthermore, according to information we have, the Russians continue their offensive operation in the direction of Miropolskaya. This time the Russians are trying to secure the tree lines to the east of the village. The Russians are trying to concentrate their forces right in front of the settlement of Miropolskaya, and most likely during the next several days the Russians will make first attempts to attack the village from the south and from the north. Furthermore, according to several very reliable pro-Russian resources, the armored force of the Russian Federation began another offensive operation in the direction of Miropolye from the village of Garnal. As for this direction, don't know for sure whether the Russians managed to get some results or not, but obviously the Russians will try further. Now let's talk about the northeastern part of the Kharkiv region. During the previous 24 hours, as you can see, we got lots of icons and geolocations in this area. At some point of the special military operation, the Russians intensified their activities significantly. The most interesting updates from this area are coming from the northeastern part of Kharkiv region. Today, the Russians published this video, and in this video we can see how the Russians were attacking, bombing, and clearing the village of Stroyevka. Probably this is the most northeastern village in the Kharkiv region that used to be under complete Ukraine control. So in this video we can see how the Russians destroyed several Ukrainian positions, several vehicles, and in the final part of this video we can see, after all these explosions, we can see how a Russian soldier raised the Russian flag in the most southern building of this area. So this is the moment. And this building was geolocated immediately. This is exactly the construction where the Russian soldier raised his flag. Based on this video and based on the report that was provided today by the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation, the Russians managed to secure this territory completely, and we have colored this area. So let's compare the map. For example, this is the situation that you can see in front of your screens by the end of the 28th of May of 2025, and this is the situation by the end of the 29th of May. Furthermore, according to information we have, the Russians managed to secure secure this entire pocket between the villages of Stroyevka and the village, let's say, of Topoli. So all these territories are already under complete Russian control, and according to several sources, the Russians continue their offensive. And currently the clashes are taking place for this forest by the name of Chernetskaya. There are very heavy clashes right now. The Russians, as you can see, are using those flamethrower systems. We expect that tomorrow either this forest would fall or the Russians would be able to improve their position significantly. Now we understand that currently the Russians are going to use this foothold in the northeastern part of Kharkiv region with the purpose to attack the next settlements in this direction. We are talking about the villages of Dvorichinska and Balagovka. So we expect that the village of Balagovka would be attacked by the Russians from the north as well. As the first task for the Russians in the northeastern direction, we see this red line. So the Russians would try to establish complete control over this area during the next week, because this is exactly the timings that the Russians need to do this. Furthermore, we start receiving more and more updates of FPV drone attacks inside of this pocket. During the previous 24 hours, the Russians published lots of videos how they were hunting and attacking Ukraine vehicles and the most important operators of FPV drones. So we see that the Russians established certain control over this territory with the purpose to ruin logistics and not to allow the Ukrainians to bring forces from one side to another. Furthermore, the Russians, as you can see, continue their offensive operation to the east of the city of Volchansk, and today the Russians bombed this part of the forest, this biggest forest along the border. We expect that this is something like artillery preparation, and we expect that the Russians are planning to advance in this direction during the next several hours or even days. So this is the situation in this area. The Russians are trying once again to cut this pocket and to shorten the lines in this area between Pechenegi Reservoir and the city of Kupyansk itself. So everything in the northeastern part of Kharkiv region, the Russians most likely would try to attack and would try to establish control over during summer offensive operation. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the southern Kupyansk direction. Let's talk about the Liman direction. During the previous 24 hours, we got a lot of very important updates, and the most important updates are coming from the northern part of this flank. Today, the Russians managed to improve their positions in the direction of the village of Volgovka. We got geolocation that can confirm this. The video was published by the Ukrainian sources, and in this video we can see how Ukrainians were attacking Russians along the entire front line in this area. Lots of tree lines, lots of positions, lots of buildings were damaged and attacked by Ukrainians with FPV drones. There are lots of episodes, as you can see, and two of them were geolocated. One of the strikes took place exactly in this area. The Russians took under control this stronghold. Another episode took place in the most eastern part of the village of Rytkadub. And based on these two videos, we adjusted the map probably, let's say 12 hours ago, so this morning. And right before we started making this video, this evening report, we got another video published by the Russian sources, and in this very short video that takes 14 seconds, we can see a Russian soldier that was waving with the Russian flag in the most western part of the village by the name of Rytkadub. This is 100% proof, this is 100% evidence that the Russians, as a result of offensive operation, by the end of the 29th of May of 2025, managed to establish complete control over the village of Rytkadub, and this is obviously a turning point in the battle for the city of Liman. Now the Russians, according to this video, managed to get the village of Nitrios and managed to get the village of Karpovka. So now the Russians have possibilities, and most likely they're going to start doing this. Probably already they have already started doing this. They're going to move in the southern direction along the river of Nitrios towards the village of Shandrigalova. Along the river, the Russians are going to attack Zelenodalia in the very near future, and the Russians most likely will try to finish the battle for Kolodisi. So by the time the Russians get this red line, and this is approximately are going to do during the next 2-3 weeks, then the battle for Liman, for the city of Liman, is going to start. Anyway, the battle for the city has already started by taking under control the village of Rytkadub, and now we're going to see the Russians are getting closer and closer to the settlement as well. Furthermore, the Russians continue attacking and destroying Ukrainian positions on the territory of the village of Zarechna. The Ukrainians have lots of FPV drone operators, temporary deployment points points that Ukraine used to slow down the Russians in the village of Tarskoye. The Russians probably control the situation for 24 hours, 7 days a week, with the purpose to discover positions, and as soon as the Russians discover another position of the armed force of Ukraine, they try to destroy it immediately. In this video, we can see, according to the author of this video, that the Russians destroyed a temporary deployment point of the FPV drone operator exactly in this point. Furthermore, today we got reports that the Russians managed to restore or to, let's say, to confirm Russian position in the area of farms to the north of the village of Tarskoye. We still don't know for sure what is the status of the settlement, because maybe the settlement is in the gray zone, maybe the settlement either under complete Ukraine or under complete Russian control. We don't know for sure, but this geolocation at least confirms Russian control over the most northern part. We expect that during the next days we're going to receive more videos from the settlement of Tarskoye, and probably due to the situation with the village of Ritkadub, we expect that the first geolocations we're going to receive from the village of Zarychny as well. So the clashes most likely are going to move on the territory of this settlement. If it happens, then Ukrainians most likely will start thinking how to stabilize the situation here as well, because the village of Zarychny and the village of Liman is open gate, open road to attack the city of Siversk from behind. As for the city of Siversk, during the previous 24 hours, the Russians managed to improve their positions. We got video published by the Ukrainian sources where they counterattacked the most western part of the village, and as a result of Ukraine counterattack, the Ukrainians managed to capture at least one Russian soldier exactly in this area. Based on this video, we came to the conclusion that the territories to the east of this point were captured by the Russians probably several days ago. So based on this video, we have adjusted the map, and currently we have proofs that the Russians control at least 55% of the settlement, and the Ukrainians control the rest of the village to the west of the in the western part. So we see the Russians continue their offensive. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the most interesting area, in the area of a major and general battle of 2025. Let's talk about the city of Konstantinovka. And first, let's talk about the city of Chasiv Yar. During the previous 24 hours, the Russians managed to improve their positions and to secure the central part of the city completely. Furthermore, according to information we have, the Russians improved their positions already in the southern parts and micro districts of the city. So, summarizing everything that we received during the previous 24 hours, we can make a conclusion that most likely the Russians are planning to finish the battle for the most important parts of the city of Chasiv Yar during the next week. So, the battle for this area is coming to an end. The Ukrainians see the concentration of Russian forces in the city of Bakhmut, because exactly from the city of Bakhmut the Russians carry out the main number of their attacks. So that is why the Ukrainians intensify their bombardments of the city with the purpose to destroy as many as possible Russian temporary deployment points. So in this area we are going to see lots of actions during the next several weeks. Now let's talk about the Liman-Kupyansk pocket itself. The Russians today managed to finish the battle for the village of Gnatovka. Today pro-Russian resources published this video where we can see how a Russian soldier raised another Russian flag on the territory of the village. Furthermore, today the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation confirmed that the village of Gnatovka was completely secured and taken by the Russians by the end of the 29th of May of 2025. Based on this video with Russian flag and based on the report of the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation, we have colored this pocket completely. So the southwestern pocket of Liman-Kupyansk area was colored in Russian favor based on these two reports. So just now you could see the changes on the ground. Furthermore, according to information we have, the Russians are about to finish the battle for the settlement of Zarya. According to information we have, by the end of the 29th of May of 2025, the Russians secured around 80% of the village, and the Russians continue advancing further. Furthermore, according to several mappers, this entire territory was taken and secured by the Russians. As for now, it's very difficult to understand whether the Ukrainians managed to escape this cauldron, whether the Ukrainians managed to evacuate their soldiers from this area. We don't know for sure this, but obviously during the next days the Russians will publish us lots of videos with trophies and lots of videos with abandoned Ukrainian equipment and vehicle that later were captured by the Russians. So this is the situation in this area. The battle for this pocket has ended most likely today by the end of the 29th of May, and now the Russians are going going to move further in the direction of Yablunovka, Alexander Kalinova, and the Russians are going to attack this area at least from two directions, from the west and from the south. And most likely the Russians are going to move in the northeastern direction with the purpose to attack Katerinovka, because during the previous 24 hours we got lots of videos from Shcherbinovka and the village of Novospaska, where the Russians were FPV droning and attacking Ukrainian units here, which means that the Russians are trying to pin the Ukrainian down and not to allow them to escape this area. So the Russians are trying to force for as many as possible Ukrainians to stay on their positions, while the main Russian groups are trying to outflank the Ukrainians by attacking in the direction of Katerinovka. So we expect additional activities of the Russians along the Seversky Donetsk-Donbass canal in the southeastern part of Konstantinovka. We see that the Russian offensive, summer offensive operation is coming in full strength, but obviously these are not only resources and only possibilities of the Russians that we can see right now. Most likely the Russians have a lot of sources to intensify their activities, because it's just the beginning. It's not even the summer, it's just the late spring, but telling the truth. So the summer still hasn't started, but the Russians was already started their summer offensive operation, and we see how the Russians are attacking. And it's very difficult even to imagine what is going to happen, let's say in the 15th, in the middle of June, or at the beginning of July. Most likely the Russians will continue their offensive. Now let's talk about the situation along N23 and N32 roads. During the previous 24 hours we got lots of important updates. First of all, and the most important, is that the Russians today reported and confirmed that as a result of offensive operation, the armed forces of the Russian Federation managed to establish complete control over Shevchenko Первая, this village. This village was colored, as you can see, based on the report of the Minister of Defense. This is the situation by the end of the 28th of May, and this is the situation by the beginning of the 29th of May. The Russians managed to take this village under complete control. As for the end of the day, we don't have any geolocation that can prove this. Furthermore, according to information we have, the Russians captured the village of Mirne. So two villages were taken by the Russians during the previous 24 hours, and the Russians continue offensive. Furthermore, as you can see, the Russians established certain FPV drone control in the vicinity of Novotoretsk, and currently the Ukrainians have no chances and no possibilities to bring additional forces in the direction of Shevchenko Первая with the purpose to stabilize the situation. So the Russians control the entire territory. As you can see, Shevchenko Первая is connected with Koptiva and is connected with Novotoretsk just with one road, and the Russians established complete control over this territory. So this territory is under complete Russian FPV drone control, which means that everything to the, let's say, southeast of this red line is already without any supply and support. We expect that due to this situation, the Russians will continue offensive in the direction of Koptiva, and we expect that the first geolocations and videos we're going to receive very soon from the most southeastern part of this settlement as well. Furthermore, the Russians continue their offensive in the area of Popo Yar, Poltavka and Rusin Yar. According to information we have, during the previous 24 hours, the Russians managed to improve their position significantly by taking under control territories to the south of these anti-tank ditches. Now the front line goes along anti-tank ditches, and the Russians are trying to take everything to the south of this red small line, which is anti-tank ditches. Then the Russians most likely will start thinking what to do next. Obviously the Russians have a plan what to do next, but it's very curious where exactly the Russians are going to move, either in the direction of Rusin Yar, which is most likely, or in the direction of this village of Stepanovka in the eastern direction, or in the area of the village of Volodymyrovka to the west. Obviously, the Russians can attack in every single direction in this area, and if the Russians are able to improve their positions along every single roads of attack we just described, this is going to be the complete collapse of Ukrainian Donbass defense, and obviously it's going to be very difficult to predict the further steps of Ukrainian army. Now let's move further. Let's discuss the situation in the South Donetsk direction, where the Russians continue their offensive. Today we got reports that the Russians began advancing in the direction of the village of Novoukrainka. Currently the Russians are trying to cut and collar on the Ukrainians who are currently located on the territory of the village by the name of Alexeyevka. The Ukrainians try to counterattack in this area with the purpose to stabilize the situation, but we see that the Russians continue advancing. If the Russians somehow are able to answer the village of Novoukrainka from the south, This is going to lead to complete disaster and to creation of another cauldron for the armored forces of Ukraine on the territory of Alexeyevka. So this is approximately what the Russians are trying to do right now. At the same time, the Ukrainians during the previous days made several counterattacks in the area of Gorokhovo with the purpose to maintain this corridor for evacuation. So we expect that as soon as the Russians are able to answer Novoukrayinka, most likely the Ukrainians would begin their, let's say, retreat operation with the purpose to save soldiers and to maintain the lines. So this is going to happen probably during the next several days, probably 1 or 2 weeks. As for the Gulay Polye direction, currently the Russians are finalizing the battle for Zelenoye Polye. Today, the pro-Ukrainian sources confirmed that the Russians managed to establish complete control over the settlement, but the most interesting thing is that Ukrainians still show a small pocket inside of Russian-controlled territory, which means that according to pro-Ukrainian sources, there are still Ukrainian soldiers who were caught in cauldron by the Russians several days ago without any possibilities for evacuation. There is just a small corridor for evacuation which is located in the gray zone. The Russians most likely are trying to finish this cauldron, and they will try to do this during the next 24-48 hours. At the same time, the sources reported that there were very heavy clashes for Novopol and that the Russians are about to clear the area in this region as well. The Russians during the previous 24 hours carried out massive missile strike in the southern part. Today, pro-Russian resources published this video. According to several sources, the Russians, as a result of reconnaissance operation, managed to discover positions of headquarters of some group of forces of Ukrainian army. And as a result of combined strike with Iskander and drones, these headquarters and several ammo depots around were destroyed. So maybe the Ukrainians were planning to do something in this area, but most likely Ukrainian plans were ruined. Another important thing is that Germany during the previous 24 hours announced additional package of military assistance for Ukraine worth 5 billion euros. Furthermore, according to information we have, on the 4th of June of 2025, European countries, NATO countries are planning to carry out another meeting, the next meeting of the countries sponsoring Ukraine, and this meeting will be held at the Ramstein. Most likely during this meeting, the Western countries will provide additional military assistance package to Ukraine. So we see that the Western countries, NATO countries, are trying to reinforce Ukraine with a significant number of weapons, arms, missiles, most likely just with one purpose: to stabilize the situation during the Russian summer offensive operation. Now NATO countries and European countries are trying to do everything they can with the purpose not to allow the Russians to break through Ukrainian defense and not to allow Ukraine itself to collapse completely. But today we got another very, very bad piece of news for Ukrainians. Today, according to information we have, China cut drone sales to West but supplies them to Russia. Ukraine says China has stopped selling Mavic quad drones popular on the front to Ukraine. Chinese Mavic is open to Russians but closed to Ukrainians. There are production lines on Russian territory where there are Chinese representatives. So one of the most important probably fight drone Ukrainians no longer have access to these drones, but the Russians increase the number of purchases of these drones, and this is obviously an unexpected piece of news for Ukrainians. Furthermore, China stopped selling parts and different things for this drone to the Western countries as well. So now Ukrainians will face big problems with this, and Russia will have most likely endless number of this type of weapon. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds to we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for your watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.